Professor Desiraju, welcome back to the Abhijit Chavda podcast. It's a pleasure to have you, sir.
Abhijit, it's a real pleasure. And I
So,
recollect
sir,
previous instances when I have appeared in your podcast, and I'm really looking forward to this one today.
thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So, we're going to discuss your new book, sir, India's Supply Chains in a World at War. Before we begin about what this book is about, is the world truly at war, sir, right now?
Depends how you define war.
Hmm.
If by war you say boots on the ground and kind of what the common person thinks of as war, there are wars in Ukraine, there is a war in Gaza, and there might be a war in a few other places. So it depends. If by war you mean boots on the ground, then maybe the whole world is not at war.
Hmm.
But there are other things that can be called wars. I mean, Sindoor, where you could do a war from the air with missiles. There could be other wars done with social media,
Hmm.
with artificial intelligence, where you try to subvert the mind of a person. That is also a war. Because if war is any adversarial interaction between two bodies, then I would feel well and truly the world is at war.
Hmm. Right, sir. So, what is the book about? It's about supply chains, right? And you've got seven case studies that you have taken to illustrate
Hmm.
uh, the arguments. So, could you please describe what that is?
Well, conventionally, if you were to use the word supply chains,
Hmm.
till about, maybe a decade ago, it would have to do mostly with the movement of goods and merchandise, typically within a country. And this was primarily the concern of people in, say, business management
Hmm.
and domestic manufacturing, stuff like that. So it had to do with the movement of vehicles on roads, trains, stuff like that. But I think as I said, typically in the last decade, when the nature of the products being sold has become so complicated, if you take a simple cell phone of the kind all of us use, there's something like a minimum of 200 different components that have to be sourced from different parts of the world, even. And getting all these to some place where they're manufactured, assembled, semi assembled, involves the movement of all these things from all over the world. And this is not true just with cell phones, but with many other things today. And so you find that in each of these cases, a supply chain is now involved.
Hmm.
So things have to come and go from one country to the other. And today we have countries that may be friendly with each other, they may be neutral with respect to each other, they may be adversarial. So then the matter of the supply chain now acquires a global dimension. It is no more, it has come out strictly out of the concern of MBA people. It has now almost gone into geopolitics.
Yes.
Like if you take again, going back to the cell phone example, all of us know that they have little batteries in them. And all of us, I think, well, many of us know that this battery contains lithium. We've heard this word lithium battery when you go to the shop. But how many of us know that this lithium in this battery will only work properly if there is a small amount of another metal called cobalt. So the lithium battery will only work, it's called a lithium cobalt battery if you take it seriously. And this cobalt, unlike lithium, is a rather a rare metal. And one of the major sources of cobalt in the world is an unstable country right in the middle of Africa called the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it's the source of much of the world's cobalt. So countries like the US, China, who are interested in making these rechargeable batteries. I mean, we're talking about rechargeable batteries for they need to get cobalt. Hook or crook, they have to get cobalt. So therefore, a lot of the world's attention is going to this unstable country called Democratic Republic of Congo. So how do you get that thing from there to wherever the battery is made? They have to be somehow shipped. So instead of shipping within a country, you have to ship things between countries. And then suppose you want to take something from Democratic Republic of Congo to China, suppose. They have to go through a sea passage called the Strait of Malacca near Singapore. And that is a choke point for anything that comes and goes from China, typically. So whoever controls the Strait of Malacca is in a position to interfere with the movement of cobalt from, say, Congo to China. India is pretty close to the Strait of Malacca. Our Nicobar Islands are not very far from that place. So you see, immediately I'm bringing in many countries Congo, India, China. So these are the new supply chains. And therefore, this book is all about not just batteries, but 7 case studies semiconductors, rare metals, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, energy, artificial intelligence, and extraterrestrial supply chains. So we've taken 7 case studies and analyzed each of them in a certain amount of depth. The book is more than 500 pages long.
Okay.
And we have said that even with the case of the 7 case studies, 4 countries principally have to be considered in today's world, the world at war.
Yeah.
And we don't call these places countries anymore, but we call them empires. And the 4 empires of today are America, China, India, and Russia. So these are going to be the 4 dominant empires in the 21st century. That is what our book prognosticates. And all these supply chains we have looked at from the point of view of the interaction and interplay between the 4 empires of the 21st century. And we have minor players also like Europe, which we don't call an empire. It may be half an empire today. Because Europe today is not the Europe that it was 100 years ago. Certainly not. 100 years ago, Europe was the dominant place in the world. Today, 100 years later, it's all changed. So basically, the book is about this. So it's about materials, goods, commodities which have to move, and the interplay interaction between empires and countries. And unlike the old days, that's where the war business comes in. What I mean to say here is that in the old days, when countries were at relatively peaceful terms with each other, even these global supply chains were made, optimized for efficiency. So you'd have to have a nice, neat way in which all these things went from country to country. And the technical term for this is just in time.
Hmm.
Just in time means whenever you want something, it comes there exactly at that time, so that you don't waste any time in moving these goods. Now, what has happened is when the world is at war, and that's why I said the world is indeed at war, we have moved from just in time to just in case. So, just in case one country reneges or backs out, let's say a country like India or something, we need to have a second option to get that stuff into the country. And so, instead of efficiency, we go for what is called resilience.
Hmm.
So, efficiency means just in time, resilience means just in case. So, tomorrow, suppose China does something funny to us with respect to any of these commodities in our seven case studies, then where does India go next? We cannot just stay around and say, okay, China is not giving us this, so we don't know what to do. So, we must have a second option, third option, etc. So, also, if you want to use the scientific words for this, supply chains, even the global ones 10 years ago, were all examples of what we call simple systems.
Okay.
Today, with the emphasis on resilience and just in case, we go to something called a complex system.
Okay.
So, simple versus complex. The complex systems, scientifically speaking, are what are called self healing.
Okay.
So, if China behaves badly to us, suppose, for example, we want to make this rechargeable batteries. Nowadays, they allow China to make the battery and then we import it or something. Then maybe if things get really bad, we will develop our own links with Democratic Republic of Congo. We've got enough lithium now, I think, in this country. So tomorrow we'll start a new show where we start making these rechargeable batteries ourselves. So you see, countries also today are rapidly changing how they deal with manufacturing also, which means also with four empires and so many little empires, countries are keeping their options open about everything. And certainly, America, China, India, Russia are keeping their options about many of these products. And so, this is what our book actually tries to address. And it's going to be rapidly changing because complex systems also mutate, they keep changing. Simple systems tend to be relatively static. So, we can see an example of today's supply chains as a complex system that is constantly evolving, self healing. Each country would like to get to the ideal condition. How it gets there is the question. And I think that's what our book tries to address.
So one question: why do you characterize certain countries as empires now? What has changed?
Well, there is a definition of an empire. See, we have a
Uh-huh.
country and then we have an empire.
Yeah.
A country is simply a political definition, it's what you see in the map. Okay. So, a country is a place where the government exercises sovereignty. Sovereignty means you can issue your own currency, you have an armed forces that protects the borders, and basically you have what are called sovereignty or sovereign rights over that place. So country is a purely official diplomatic definition. Now in an empire on the other hand, there are some criteria for an empire. The first thing is the influence of that country extends beyond its political borders. First, the influence of the country, the empire, extends to the extent of making other countries change their economic policies. Then, third, This is very important. The empire has a civilizational context. So if you take India, now it is better to call it Bharat. So we have what is called a political India. Then we have what is called Bharatavarsha, which roughly corresponds to today's modern Afghanistan to somewhere near Indonesia, Bali, or something like that. That's where our immediate influence extends, maybe a little bit in Tibet. And then we've got Bharataganda, which goes even little beyond, let us say up to Iran, Iraq, that area. And then we go to what is called Jambudvipa, which is roughly up to Central Asia, Mediterranean, and so on. So each country has concentric circles, or each empire, sorry, has concentric circles around it, which, to use the Sanskrit word, is mandala. Now, the US is a very good example of an empire today. So the country itself is the US itself, the 50 states. Then you've got the next mandala, which is, say, the Anglosphere, which is the UK. And it doesn't have to be even physically contiguous, but what we call Five Eyes,
The Five Eyes.
say Australia, New Zealand, all these places, the Anglosphere. Then we've got the next mandala, which are basically, we call them supply chain serfs. So in supply chains, you've got landlords and serfs. So serf countries to the US today are Germany, Japan, etc. So you've got concentric circles around the American empire. These are all the mandalas. So what's going to happen with these our four empires is each of them is going to start drawing concentric circles around themselves. And sometimes very interesting, we can, if we have time, we'll talk about the Eurasia issue. These concentric circles of India, China, and Russia may actually intersect in certain places, which is going to be one of the most interesting regions of the world. Let us say Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbek, even closer home, Chitral, which we have written about, and the dubious position of Pakistan in all this, which is almost being squeezed in by Afghanistan and Iran from the two sides, if you look at modern geopolitical realities. So an empire goes beyond the country. I mean, the old British Empire, on which they said the sun never sets. The German Empire, the French Empire, which was all over Africa. So they all had, in a sense, the USSR. That was a Soviet empire with all the satellite countries of Eastern Europe, which were completely dependent on the USSR economically and in so many other ways. So, empire that way must be distinguished from a country. And what seems to be happening is, see, this is very interesting, Abhijit, because the age of empire in Europe was between 1815, Congress of Vienna with the Prince Metternich of Austria, and the end of the World War One, which in many cases, especially as geopolitical things are concerned, in my opinion at least, World War One is far more important than World War Two, because the end of World War One signaled the demise of four empires, big ones: the German Empire, the Habsburgs in Austria, the Ottoman Empire in Turkey, and the Romanov Empire in Russia. So four empires collapsed. There was only one left, and that was the so-called victor of World War One, the British Empire. But already, if you look at his world history, the seeds of the downfall of the British Empire already started at the end of World War One, and it was only made official with the loss of India in 47. And after the Suez Crisis, I think the British Empire didn't exist anymore. And that was
Yes.
also when we bring up this issue of de-dollarization and what is reserve currency of the world. The British pound was the reserve currency of the world till the Suez crisis. And then the leadership of the Anglosphere naturally passed over to America. And so you can see this fascinating tapestry of history, economics, politics coming right into the matter of supply chains. It's an economic thing, If you don't have all these products which we talk about in our 7 case studies, modern life as we know won't exist. So whether we like it or not, world cannot go back to some old rustic situation that it was say 500 years ago. So there's no point in
Mhm.
becoming nostalgic about it. We need all these things. So countries will have to get along with each other. The empires, notably, it is a quadrille. Four fellows are dancing, and we all have to see how each other's dance. You cannot afford friends and enemies anymore. I mean, this is what I meant. Each of these empires will only be motivated by self-interest. We will not have permanent friends and enemies. In the old days, in the simple system, bipolar world, you had to be with America or you had to be with the USSR. Whole world was, well, we had a few countries like India which said we are non-aligned, but nobody took us that seriously in those days because the so-called non-aligned countries of 1950s and 1960s were all very poor. So in common life and in the geopolitics also, nobody cares for poor people. So things are divvied up among the rich people, and in those cases, it was America and the Soviet Union. So they're very simple. Now we have to worry about four people. You have to be very careful what you do. So in the book tells you that, for example, in certain issues like pharma, India and China may be friendly. In certain other issues like semiconductors, India and China may be inimical. So there's nothing wrong in that. I will only quote Lord Palmerston, the great British Prime Minister of the 19th century. He says, there are no friends. He says, England doesn't have friends or enemies, it only has interests. So when the whole world is only moving with interests, you can see a natural progression. In fact, we argue that the age of empire has come back after 100 years. And in many ways, I will argue, my personal feeling is empires dealing with each other is much simpler and easier than countries dealing with each other.
So, do you see the age of multipolarity becoming a reality, or do you see bipolarity? Because the US and China seem to be in favor of bipolarity. Recently, when Trump met with Mr. Xi Jinping, he said that what welcome the G2 is going to convene shortly. So he seems to be in favor of bipolarity, a simpler world order. Do you
See,
think
I
that's going to be the case, or do you think it's going to be multipolarity?
I don't know. See, look, I am just a individual observer who is not privy to any internal documents or anything of any kind. But frankly speaking, I feel that America is just yearning nostalgically for a time when it was the policeman of the world. But actually, Trump, whatever he may say or he may not say, we all know something called the Monroe Doctrine of 1829, when the then president of the US, James Monroe, said that he was giving a signal to Europe and said, you don't poke in our backyard, which is North and South America. We won't poke in European affairs. And this was by and large the US policy for about 100 years. And Europe also did not poke its nose into things that were happening in North and South America for 100 years. Now, the culmination of World War II, or actually the start of World War II, Pearl Harbor, the Monroe Doctrine was then replaced by what may be called the Roosevelt Doctrine, named after Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And then he said that because of the current realities, the US will actively interfere in European affairs. So That was the beginning of the US being the policeman of the world. Now, what has happened again? You see, Trump is caught, in my view. In many ways, he is reverting himself from the Roosevelt doctrine back to the Monroe doctrine. Like he's very aggressive, say, with respect to Venezuela, which he views as his backyard. Actually, if you may remember that several months ago, he actually said that Bangladesh is Modi's backyard. He was acknowledging the fact that India too has got its backyard. So one must look very carefully at all these things and not go by immediate short-term things. Like I mean, he called Asim Munir for lunch or something. That changes actually nothing. There's no point people in X and so many places. Oh, we hate the US because he invited Asim Munir for lunch. No, no, that's almost irrelevant. So it depends on. I think US is nostalgic. Now China, in my view, it's my individual view that they're a little more astute. Firstly, China doesn't have one of the features of the US. The US has got two great oceans surrounding it. So no external country or empire can ever invade the US boots on the ground or even throw missiles too much. We can't do. They can't. Nobody can do it. So these two big moats on both sides. China is part of Eurasia. It's got land borders with Russia and India. So China, I think, realizes more than anyone else that there are limits. I don't feel that looking at world events, China doesn't fancy itself to be a world hegemon in the sense that the US ever was. And now, especially with the recent meetings in Tianjin and all that, Russia, China, and India have decided that they need to get together on certain issues at least, not everything. As I said, it's all now gray. It's no more black and white. So, in answer to your question, no, I don't think it's not bipolar anymore. I mean, Trump can keep dreaming that it's bipolar, but the facts on the ground don't belie that because, again, we've got this de dollarization, we've got the BRICS currency, we've got a massive collection of gold by China, India, Russia, and every country wants to get gold today. Why? Because the era of the dollar as the reserve currency of the world is now really over. It's not started, it's already middle thing. And maybe in 10 years, we have so many currencies which may be the reserve currencies. And the moment your currency is not the reserve currency of the world, you cannot be a global policeman anymore. So I think a number of these issues have to be now taken together, and this is where our book on supply chains comes in because we do talk about de-dollarization. And much of this manuscript was written about 2 years ago. So we were already anticipating all these things, which now people are really commenting about much more seriously.
So now, when it comes to supply chains, if you have supply chains that are bringing in materials into your country, you need to safeguard those supply chains. And the US has the greatest power projection capabilities, more than 700, more than 800 extraterritorial military bases across the world, by which they can safeguard those supply chains. How can India safeguard its supply chains? How can, for example, Russia or China do the same? The US can do it. How can India do it?
Good question in the sense that one must never underestimate both the capabilities and the capacity of the US. They are still an
Yes.
extremely rich country. But it's just that I think they have been over ambitious about being the world's policeman. And I think one thing the US did not anticipate was the rapid rise of China. And today, the other second concern that they have is they really don't want India to become another China.
Oh, yes.
And here again, the real fear, because I have never underestimated the intelligence of the Americans. They realize that this civilizational aspect of India is very dangerous for them in the long run. And they have now only begun to slowly realize that we are much more of a civilizational state than China. It was fashionable to call China a civilizational state, but compared to India in this aspect, they are nothing. This is the true civilizational state because our religion is non Abrahamic. And so this brings us also into another area. It's the only big non Abrahamic religion in the world. I don't even call it a religion. I don't call it a way of life also. It is, well, best to call it Sanatana Dharma and allow the foreigners to try to understand what Sanatana Dharma is. There is no need for us to try to explain any of these things to them because I will only quote Sun Tzu. It's very nice if the enemy doesn't understand you. You understand the enemy, but the enemy should not understand you. So I like the situation where they don't really understand us and what makes this 5,000 year civilization tick. But if you ask me, the US is really, really scared of India, or should I now start calling it Bharat? They're very scared of Bharat because we are playing by rules that are different from what they understand. And again, to quote Chanakya and Sun Tzu, you lay the rules and you allow the enemy who thinks he is acting in his self interest to actually advance your aims. So you use the enemy to destroy the enemy. And all these things are wonderfully displayed in our civilization, especially in the Arthashastra. So I think Indians too are getting a good feeling for how to play this war game. We started this podcast talking about war. And I do think that responsible people in our government and so on do understand that it is a world at war. It's not going to be like World War One and World War Two. So let us say that World War Three is already going on. And it is in this aspect that we have to look at supply chains also.
Now, when it comes to certain countries, they are what we call autarkies, which means that they have everything they need, all the resources, all the minerals, everything available in their own territory. Russia is a great example, whether it's fertilizers, whether it is metals, whether it is whatever, they have all the resources within their own territory. In that case, Russia will be, I think, a little more immune to the vagaries and vicissitudes of supply chain disruptions and all that. But India is not. So, what can India do uh, to offset this issue?
Well, this is the aim of every empire
Hmm.
to control a supply chain from the beginning to the end.
Yes.
Russia may have natural resources, but in many cases, it doesn't have money
Hmm.
and it doesn't have the manufacturing capability of some of these goods. Some it has. The only countries, I think, or empires that have managed to control a supply chain from the beginning to end is, say, America and China. China, especially
Yes.
in the case of rare earths, which is one of the
Yes.
chapters in our book. So, obviously, in a supply chain, if you control it from the beginning to end, then you've got a monopoly. That is the
Yes.
ideal situation. But in most of the cases, in our 7 case studies, no single country controls the supply chain from the beginning to the end. No. Like the US may control many things, but the cost of manufacture is so high
Hmm.
that getting things over to the US itself is a problem for the US. They can't see the four empires have in their own ways run out of money. And in the old bipolar simple system, when one country became poor, another country became rich. Today, we have a situation where all countries are becoming poor simultaneously. So then what happens? Why is every empire, every country becoming poor simultaneously? Because the demands of the people are now too much. And so people want more and more things, more and more efficient, more and more fast. So you can't, you can't run a household, for example, if all the family members want everything at the same time. Everybody will become poor together. This is what's happening with countries today.
That's a really interesting point. So everybody wants to live at the standards that the US has set for its citizens. And that is essentially not possible, right? It's going to ruin the world. So how do we deal with that problem?
Well, the US itself cannot live in the way it was living in
Yeah.
the 1950s and 1960s.
Hmm.
If you go to a place like California or something, most youngsters who are beginning their life cannot afford to buy a house anymore.
Yes.
Whereas buying your own house when you got a job was almost taken for granted 50 years ago.
Yes.
So the US itself cannot afford its old standard of living. So there's no point in saying make America great again. How do you make yourself great if you don't have the money to do it? You know?
Hmm. Right. So let's talk about two things that India is focusing on. One is semiconductors. The other is rare earths. Now, as far as I understand, India has rare earth reserves, but we haven't developed the capabilities to extract them and utilize them, which is why we are so dependent on China. So, why is it that 90% of the rare earths supply is controlled by China? Not even the Americans. Even the Americans depend on China. The one is that, and secondly, where does India stand in the semiconductor supply chain issue? Because India is really focusing on semiconductor manufacturing now.
You're right in saying that we are concentrating in these two areas.
Hmm.
So in semiconductors, we'll take semiconductors first.
Yeah.
I think we're really making progress. And some of the initiatives taken by the government in recent years, I mean the last 3, 4 years. See, the semiconductor business also is got to do with fabrication, design, and applications. So far we have been fabrication is pretty cheap. So many countries, including India, can import the wafers that are made elsewhere. Design is where we have been traditionally a bit strong, but applications were not there at all. And I think in the case of semiconductors, India is a very, very, very poor third after America and China.
China. Hmm.
Russia is not there at all in the semiconductor thing, as far as I am aware. Now, we're a very, very, very poor third. And the way in which we talk about it is when you are very weak compared to your adversaries, better to stay underground and be below the radar level. So we have strongly advocated that we should concentrate more on 65 nanometer chips, which are not strategic at all. They're used for things like refrigerators, washing machines, all the white goods. So America is not going to care about us if we make lots of 65 nanometer chips. Even coming down to 28 and all that, it may or may not be necessary for us. Right now, we need to stay below the radar level of America because we've given examples where Japan tried to compete with America in terms of semiconductors, and then it was brutally crushed by America. At one point in time, they were doing better than America in terms of semiconductors.
I see.
So I think there is no point in being over ambitious and just to use some buzzwords and buzz phrases. No, we can make 8 nanometer also. No, you can make so many things, but I think actually we can't. And because if you at the size of the chip becomes smaller, difficulty in making it increases exponentially. It's not easy. It's a different, again, a characteristic of a complex system. So that's about semiconductors. Now, rare earths. See, rare earths is an interesting story. The first thing you said was that we have lots of rare earths. Any country that has a large surface area has rare earths because rare earths, firstly, we emphasize in the beginning of the chapter, they are not rare. They're quite common. Cerium is one of the rare earths, and it is the 26th most common metal in the Earth's crust. Cerium is more common in the Earth's crust than lead and tin. Okay. So, firstly, they're not rare, except that we don't know where they are because of a very curious reason that right from the early days, because of some mistake, this rare earth mining was given to the Department of Atomic Energy.
Okay.
And the reason for that is given in the book. I don't think we have enough time in this podcast to talk about it. But really, what happened was that, and the Department of Atomic Energy was not interested in the rare earths. They were only interested in thorium.
Uh-huh.
So happened, unfortunately, that the thorium beach in Kerala contained a lot of cerium, which is a rare earth. Thorium is not a rare
Hmm.
earth.
Yeah.
So they handed over the whole beach to the DAE, and then rare earths became basically a kind of unwanted child of the DAE. So anytime somebody finds, let us say, even thinks that he's going to find some rare earth in Chhattisgarh, there are plenty of it, by the way, there. He has to go and apply to the DAE, which is not really interested in the matter.
I
So
see.
this is one of the reasons why we ignored. And so we've got a lot of rare earths, but we don't know where it is. Now, with regards to China, what happened was till about 1950, there was a place called Mountain Pass in California, in America, where all the 17 rare earths were located in the same small area. And America was then the leader of this rare earth technology in the whole world. Before it was shown that rare earths were really important for so many things.
Hmm.
The problem with rare earths is, yes, you may have it. They exist in the form of what chemistry people will call oxides. So these oxides have to be reduced, typically with a reducing agent, which is typically charcoal or carbon or something. So you just take this oxide and then you put charcoal or coal with it and then heat it to a high temperature. The oxygen burns off as carbon dioxide, leaving the metal. Now, this kind of chemistry is highly polluting.
Yes.
So, at the time of Richard Nixon presidency, America basically said that okay, it's part of that also detente with China and trying to improve. They said we'll allow you to do the polluting chemistry in China. And China, as you know, large portions of China are practically uninhabited.
Yeah.
And one of these places is called Inner Mongolia or something.
Yes.
So China was simply allowed to import ores from all over the world. Actually, for many years, China also has a large land area. It has a lot of rare earths, but they found it cheaper to import the oxides from other places. And so the whole of Inner Mongolia became a vast furnace. So, so many square kilometers of that are now practically destroyed ecologically, but they never cared because nobody lived there.
Right.
And so China did all this polluting chemistry, and then in the process, it gradually started acquiring a monopoly. They were doing getting the ore cheap, reducing it and getting the metal. And the vital thing that they then insisted on is that they started making the finished products using the rare earth. They did not send the refined metal to other countries to do what they want. So then they started making the products themselves. So now you see what's happening. They control the whole supply chain.
Hmm.
So then we have to buy the product from the Chinese. And once you control the whole supply chain, Abhijit, you can
Yeah.
play with the prices. Suppose India tomorrow tries to do something with permanent magnets, neodymium or something.
Hmm.
The Chinese can come in quickly and lower the price of that neodymium to
Yeah.
such an extent that it's not competitive for India to get into that business also. So something that could be expensive, they can make it very cheap. And once they've driven India out of the market, they'll jack up the prices again. So you can play with the
Right.
prices just like that. So this is what actually happens with rare earths. So this is the sad story, and it'll take a while before the rest of the world reduces their dependence on China for these rare earths. And let's not forget that it is the great Deng Xiaoping who said that
Hmm.
in the early 90s, West Asia may have oil, but China has rare earths.
Hmm. Right. So, which are the other critical minerals that the book talks about?
Minerals, you mean?
Yes, minerals.
Copper.
Okay.
Copper is very critical, which is why the incident of Thoothukudi and that
Yeah.
Sterlite and all is so sad. Because
Hmm.
anytime you want to transmit energy from one place to the other, you need wires. And the best material for the wire is copper.
Yes.
So although it's people say it's a relatively common metal, but still I would feel copper is critical. Gold is
Hmm.
critical for its own reason, which is
Yes.
economic. I think silver also, the rare earths especially, we have said that India cannot afford to start dabbling in all the rare earths.
Uh-huh.
So we've identified three of them at the low, medium, and high end of difficulty and cost,
Okay.
which are cerium, samarium, and dysprosium. So there is a
Okay.
barbell strategy here that you invest a little bit in something that's cheap. And I mean, every automobile that's made today, I think, has something, oh, maybe 20 kilos of cerium in it or something. So
Hmm.
it's a low risk, low cost option. Samarium is somewhere in the middle. Dysprosium is very rare and very costly. But you see, the thing with dysprosium is that to take a neodymium magnet and make it high temperature stable, you need a little bit of dysprosium. And very few
Okay.
countries have dysprosium sources. Australia is one of them. And surprise, surprise, they have found dysprosium in the northern part of Myanmar.
Ah, okay. Okay. Yes.
That opium triangle, no?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
got a second treasure there. So you can see China and India's great interest in Myanmar today. Partly it is because of the dysprosium there.
It's right
So
next to
you
the Chinese border, actually.
I know Yunnan and
Yeah.
Kunming is not very far, but it's also not far from Agartala. So I mean,
Yep. Yep.
we don't have to feel bad about this, but we have to be aware of this, and we can't, simply say that no, that's different. We are only Indians. We Indians are only like that. No, we can't
Yeah.
afford that anymore. That we
Hmm.
Indians are not only like that. That we can be something else.
Yes. Right. You also speak about pharmaceuticals and fertilizers. So, what is the importance of that for India and other countries?
This is another interesting one. Pharma is a direct bipolar between China and India.
Okay.
The fact of the matter is that only China can make these drugs. We call them active pharmaceutical ingredient, API, in the
Okay.
technical language. So China is the only one that can make them that cheap. What it does is, you can see the beginning of the supply chain. It sends this raw material to India. India does what is called formulation. Formulation means it takes this medicine, drug, the pure compound. Like if you take aspirin, aspirin, chemically speaking, is acetyl salicylic acid. So
That's right.
he'll send that compound to India as acetyl salicylic acid. Now India will take that pure chemical compound. It can make it into a tablet. It can make it into ointment. It can make it into injection, capsule. That is called formulation.
Hmm.
So it takes the drug and makes it into a form that is marketable. For
Okay.
example, a tablet of anything. It should not deteriorate in the shelf after 3 months,
Hmm.
or it becomes so unstable that it becomes all brown and you can't use it anymore. So India has become the formulation king.
Okay.
So China makes the stuff, India formulates it, and the market is the US.
Okay.
Because the US, its entire medical system depends on the import of these drugs from India and ultimately from China.
Hmm.
So you see, I've got my four empires. Three of them are actively involved in pharma.
Yeah. It's a relay race.
Suppose China says tomorrow morning that I'm now going to send the raw material to India.
Hmm.
Or suppose China sends the raw material to India and then India formulates it and then says, no, we are only going to sell it to Africa and South America. See, each of these three countries can affect each other one way or the other. And so the matter of pharmaceutical supply chain is quite easy to understand. And actually, I find in the multipolar world tomorrow, I have predicted this, is that tomorrow, suppose China and India decide to work together, like the manufacture of these drugs and the formulation also is done in both countries through what are called clusters. So you have a cluster of companies that shares common facilities but keeps their trade secrets, and they go to those clusters and use the common facilities for synthesis, analysis, characterization, everything. And right now, China has got its clusters, India has got its clusters. Suppose tomorrow the two countries decide that it is to their mutual advantage, mutual, that if India learns a little bit of synthesis and China learns a little bit of formulation, you may actually have clusters in both India and China where they've got people from both countries coming to the same cluster. So, this is where the whole matter of supply chains becomes fascinating, because instead of becoming win lose, which is characteristic of a simple system, it can be win win, which is characteristic of a complex system. And
Hmm.
this is where the civilizational advantage of India comes in, because our whole system of Sanatana Dharma and everything, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, is that it can, everything has to be win win. And in an atmosphere where nobody has too much money, maybe that's the only way to go. I feel that this is the end of that American model, where in order for, it's also true in the European model, England became rich because India became poor.
Yes.
This need not, this doesn't, is not going to happen anymore. And I think here, I think India and our present government and all, we are well aware of this fact. Common people are still not appreciating this. Oh, we feel this is our enemy, that is our friend. No, it doesn't have to be like that anymore. And this is where I think both for semicon and for pharma, I think India is rapidly moving to this win-win situation. And in such a case, and we've written this in the book, we have a supreme advantage over all the other countries, because our Sanatana Dharma teaches us that from the very beginning. Whole world is a family, you know, and at the same time, whole world can be a family with each empire taking care of its own interest. Nobody is the loser in something like this. I think this is, if you go towards the end of the book, we have, the seven case studies, Abhijit. But the seven case studies are sandwiched between chapter 1 and chapter 9. Chapter 1
Hmm.
talks about empires, and chapter 9 talks about the last chapter, about how the empires are coming together and working together.
Okay.
So, if you read chapter 1, you'll think these are all adversarial. No, it's not adversarial, it's moving. And there is also a collection of interesting appendices in the book that were basically written in the last 6 months before publication. And we've got an appendix which could be very interesting on the nature and personality of Donald Trump
Okay.
with regards to supply chains. And the other
Hmm.
one consists of uh, our famous Western neighbor,
Okay.
and what are the consequences of the imminent breakup of Pakistan, which I believe is happening very soon, and
Okay.
what will be its effect on our supply chains. So Pakistan is for us, it's an enigma. It's not, I don't call it a country anymore. It's not, forget empire. I don't even call it a country. It is simply a kind of an land area which everybody wants. And there you everybody is using that land area of Pakistan for their own purposes.
Yes.
So it's not a country anymore. It doesn't even satisfy the definition of a country that I gave in the beginning, that it's in sovereign control of the stuff that is shown in the map, because Pakistan is not in sovereign control of the things bordering Iran, Afghanistan, nothing. It's not in control of anything. So what is the meaning of the word Pakistan? Also, I don't see it anymore. So we have an appendix on that. And we've got an appendix on what is called the end of the nation state. In
Okay.
this podcast, I have studiously avoided the use of the word nation.
Yes.
So, what is a nation? It's not exactly a country. Sometimes it can be a country. A nation can never be an empire cannot be a nation. So, we don't have time in this podcast, but I think if you read that appendix on end of the nation state, because nation state is an essentially European concept.
The
So, with
Westphalian
the
system. Yes.
Westphalian system, whatever,
Yes.
Metternich, and all that. So, with the end of Europe, I think it's also the end of nations. So, that's to cut a long story short. So, with the
And
reading the last chapter and then the appendices, I think one will get
hmm,
a pretty good idea as to what is happening. This whole supply chains and everything, which is a fascinating subject today. I think
hmm.
so many PhD theses can now be written by serious people about global supply chains and also in war. And I think I may say, as we're reaching the end of the podcast, we start with a quotation from the Mahabharata, which is actually Duryodhana's quotation. He says, when you are at war, there is no point in pretending that we are at peace,
Right.
which I
Indeed.
think,
Yes.
which I think summarizes very well. The greatness of our epics is that in a short and easy to understand language, it expresses some profound and fundamental truths. And I think Duryodhana's statement that when you're at war, there is no point in pretending we are at peace. And the world should not pretend that it's at peace. I'm coming back to what you asked in the very beginning. Are we at war?
Hmm.
Definitely, I will end this podcast by saying that yes, we are definitely at war. You may not want to call it World War III or whatever, but we are in the midst of a world war today. And that is why the book is titled the way it is titled. India's supply chains in a world at war. War. This is a war book. It's a book on war. It's not a book on supply chains. It's a war story. And we have quoted many, many generals of the past,
Okay.
especially European generals from Germany, Russia, England, and so on, who have talked about war. Clausewitz, who studied the war
Clausewitz.
theoretically, and some of the Russian generals and the German generals in World War II, they have said some inimitable things about war, which I think it is ours is a war book. It's a war story.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for explaining this in detail. And I will urge everybody to read this book because it is very relevant to the changing world order that we are living through to understand what's happening. Thank you so much, sir. All the best for your future projects. And I look forward to speaking with you again in the future soon.
Abhijit, it's a great pleasure, and I want the listeners of your podcast, maybe they don't know that a person who began his orthodox career in a simple system as a structural chemist
Uh-huh.
is now dabbling with complex systems, things like war, economics, law, and so which means that all subjects are now fair game for any researcher. So I want
Indeed.
people to write more books on these lines and to take an active interest in what is happening in the world around us. And we are going from simplicity to complexity, from efficiency to resilience, and from just in time to just in case. Thank
Just in
you
case.
so much indeed. Namaste. And looking forward to a Bharat that is one of the most powerful empires in the world 50 years from now, if not the most powerful. I don't rule that out also.
We hope so. I hope so. So I certainly hope so. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Namaste.